and today's webinar is going to be a trash talk, a guide to key waste streams. So firstly, I'm your host. My name is Emmanuel. I work at Bywaters and I am part of the sustainability team at Bywaters. And this is the agenda for today. So firstly, a bit of context. Why are we doing this? It is Recycle Week this week. So it's a big week. And what we've decided to talk about is going through the main waste streams and speaking about them, giving some tips and talking about legislation as well. So that's going to be the case for dry mix recycling, general waste, food waste, batteries and hazardous waste. And we do have a guest speaker today. So Dave Carter from Auditel, he'll be speaking at the end. And right at the end, after Q&A, we've got a quick workshop, just something to take away, a few questions to take away with you, something you can think about as well. So, Recycle Week. What is Recycle Week? What is Recycle Week? So it aims to bring together retailers, brands, businesses, government, media, consumers, everyone really, to try and educate the public and improve recycling habits. So it would encourage individuals and communities to reduce their waste and promote sustainable practices and environmental protection. So overall, a very, very good thing and something that we want to be taking part in. We're going to move on to the UK recycling. So as a whole, in the UK, recycling saves between 10 to 15 million tons of CO2 emissions annually. This is the equivalent to removing 3.5 million cars off the road. So it is a very, very big thing and it has a big impact. So make sure that you are recycling. Recycling saves on energy use as well, as producing items from recycled material often uses less energy than by making them from the virgin resources. So for example, an aluminium can, if it's recycled, can actually become a new aluminium can. It's one of the most infinitely recyclable materials, just needs to be recycled effectively. And then some common items that you might be wanting to recycle, so things like paper or cardboard, your plastic bottles, your cans, your aluminium, your glass, things like that. These are all things that we want to be recycling and things that should end up in the dry mix recycling. It's not always the case, unfortunately, but that's what we sort of are here today to discuss. I'm also going to speak about some common contaminants as well. So things like food packaging or compostable packaging or tissues, wooden stirrers, coffee cups, things like that, they actually can't go in the dry mix recycling. And it does impact the overall scores and percentages and contaminates the other items. So in the diagram on the right hand side of the screen there, it sort of outlines the actual recycling rate from household waste. So if you can see in the stats here, it was 44.6% in 2021, which was a slight increase from 44.4% in 2020. Now, we don't have the most up-to-date figures, but we're hoping that this trend that you can sort of see on the graph, it's slowly increasing. We're hoping that that can continue and actually shoot right up as well. So why does it matter? Why are we talking about all this recycling? Well, it has an environmental impact, conserving your natural resources, cutting greenhouse gas emissions, and reducing landfill waste. It also has an economic benefit as well. So it's actually cheaper to recycle than to throw it away as general waste. You can also support your local recycling industries, contribute to circular economy products, and it has a bit of a community impact as well. If you're reusing or donating or recycling items, these items can get turned into new items, which reduces, new items having to be made, like we spoke about earlier. Now we're going to speak about our waste journey. What happens when we collect our general waste, the dry mix recycling from site? Let's say you have an office building in the City of London. We would come out there and we would collect it on one of our Euro 6 fleet. That will then come back to our material recovery facility. So we're based in Bromley by Bow, and we have a big MRF for short. And that is basically lots and lots of machinery, lots and lots of people all working together to segregate your dry mix recycling into each individual waste stream. So let's say, for example, PET would be one, polypropylene would be another. You'd have cardboard, you'd have aluminium, you'd have glass, and it will all be separated out into each individual stream. So these things are then all baled up right at the end, and they get sent off to reprocessors who can actually use that material to create new products. Moving on, we're going to talk about different types of plastic. So not all types of plastic can be recycled, unfortunately. So the ones that we can recycle are PET, HDPE, LDPE, and PP. So these are the main four that you'll be seeing on a day-to-day. So things like PET are like your water bottles, your plastic bottles. quite lightweight. You know, you see them everywhere. HDPE is a little bit more rigid, it's a little bit more hard, and you can put things like bleach in there. So your bleach bottles, your shampoo bottles, all of these can be recycled as well. LDPE, so this is a bit more lightweight, you know, things like your plastic bags, or if you've got like a film on top of some packaging, it's normally an LDPE that can be recycled as well. And the last thing is polypropylene. So this is a bit more tough. It can be a bit more heat resistant. So if you've got, let's say, a microwavable meal tray, it could be something like that that can be recycled as well. The things that we can't accept, things that you most likely won't be coming across all the time. So things like PVC. So if you're doing some construction work, you might have some PVC piping that can't be recycled, unfortunately, in the dry mix recycling waste stream. Polystyrene as well. We're not really big fans of polystyrene. It is very, very lightweight. It is very, very weak, and it does end up everywhere. So in our MRF, we actually use different parts of machinery, like I said, but we also use gusts of air to shoot things in different directions and make sure everything ends up in the right bales, basically. Polystyrene is very, very lightweight. So when we shoot it with gusts of air, it will actually fly everywhere but the place you want it to go. So that's another reason why we can't really collect it as well. And the last material is number 7, which is other. So this is any material that is maybe slightly different, or they're always creating new materials now. So they've just got a group for it, which is 7, which is other. So this could be things like compostable packaging or plant lined plastic, anything like that. They sort of fall under that other section where you might need a specialist waste stream to actually be able to dispose of that. And if you see on the left-hand side of the screen there, we've got all of the symbols. So these are resin identification codes for the type of plastic. If you do have any plastic, it should have one of these numbers on it. So that's the way that you can actually identify what the plastic is that you're looking at. So if you maybe had a water bottle in front of you or next to you, if you just flip it underneath, you should see a small little triangle with a 1 inside. So just a reminder, those triangles don't mean that it's automatically recyclable. You have to be looking at the number or the letters underneath to identify your type of plastic. So moving on to a few recycling tips. How can you tell if something's recyclable or not? That's a question that we always get. And the quickest and easiest way of knowing if one of your materials is recyclable is by doing the scrunch test, which you can see on the top there. So if you grab, let's say, a piece of wrapping paper, for example, and you scrunch it up into a ball, if you open your hand and it springs back out, it means that it's probably most likely not recyclable. That's because it's not just paper. If it was just paper or made out of just paper, it would stay scrunched up in your hand. It would stay scrunched up in a ball. So the reason that it springs back open if it's non-recyclable is because it's most likely a composite material. So that's more than one material that's been melded together to actually create that wrapping paper, let's say in this instance. So it's most likely would have a bit of a plastic lining or a silicone lining. It would look a little bit glossy as well. So even things like crisp packets or sweet wrappers, they most likely will spring right back out because they're composite materials. So there'll be aluminium with plastic or paper with plastic as well. And the other question that we always get is, if something's dirty, can it be recycled? How dirty can it be? Do I need to wash it? Do I need to rinse it? So for that, we recommend the tip test. Don't recommend that you actually do it, but just thinking about it is good enough. So let's say you just had a yogurt, like you can see in the video there. You just enjoyed your lovely yogurt. You've got a little bit remaining around the outside, but you don't know if it's too dirty to go in or if you need to clean it. So if you feel comfortable to tip it on your head and give it a little shake, if you think nothing's going to fall out when you do that, it's probably okay. It doesn't need to go in or to be rinsed or anything like that. You can just go straight into the dry mix recycling. If you think there is no way I'm going to risk it, it probably needs a little bit of a rinse or a little bit of a wipe with a tissue at least. So by doing that, we're thinking about the other materials in that bag of dry mix recycling, because the plastic at the end of the day is going to be okay if it's dirty. It's the other materials that might get contaminated by that yogurt or by the sauce or the oil, whatever it might be that you're eating with. So just keep in mind that when we're talking about contamination, it's not just on that one item, it's on the whole bag. So moving on, cardboard, it is recyclable. A lot of people would prefer to collect this separately, and we'd recommend if you're producing lots and lots of cardboard, maybe renting a baler or something like that, you can get a rebate, save money, as well as segregating it and making sure that there's no contamination. But just something I thought we should briefly mention. And now moving on to legislation. So legislation, unfortunately, is not the most exciting things, but I've just put a few things on the screen now. So the Environment Act of 2021 So this is the most recent and comprehensive legislation, sets out a framework for improving the environment and reducing waste. Waste management regulations from 2012, requirements for collection, treatment and disposal of waste, and Simpler Recycling 2023 initiative aims to standardise recycling practices across England. So these are things that we're hoping really take effect and actually make a huge difference. There are a few more legislations that are in the works. They keep getting pushed back, unfortunately, but these are the ones that we currently got at the moment that are making the biggest differences. So moving on, general waste. This one is a little bit of an easier waste stream to talk about. There's not so many variables. You know, if something's general waste, it's going to go in the general waste. But we've got a few stats for you here as well. So the total UK household waste generation was 27.7 million tonnes in 2021, which is an increase of 2.4% from 2020. So we can sort of see that the general waste is increasing as well. At the same time, the dry mix recycling is also increasing. So we want to be making sure that we're cutting back on the general waste produced and increasing the recycling. Perhaps these figures are, you know, they're during COVID, so maybe it's a lot of people are ordering things, it's people come into their house and it's deliveries, things like that. But it's just something to keep an eye on and making sure that we're trying to actually reduce the amount of general waste that we're producing. A few common items, so things that are general waste, anything that's a composite material. So like we spoke about earlier, anything like a crisp packet, that's more than one material melded together. Those things would all have to be general waste. So if you have crisp packets, coffee cups, anything like that, they all have to be general waste. Polystyrene as well, any tissues or any contaminated food packaging, they would all be general waste. And some common recyclable items that we normally find making their way into the general waste sometimes, you'd be surprised, paper, aluminium, glass, cardboard, and even food waste as well. So food waste, if you don't have a food waste bin, it should be going in the general waste. But if you do, make sure that it's segregated. We love to collect that separately. But why does all this matter? Why are we collecting the general waste? So we're trying to prevent pollution. So improper disposal of non-recyclable waste can lead to pollution of air, water, and soil. We don't really want to be doing that. We want to be ensuring that we have safe communities, making sure that we have proper waste disposal, maintaining clean and healthy communities and environments, and avoiding contamination of waste, of course. That's why we're segregating. Moving on to a few tips as well. So like we mentioned, how the dry mix recycling is making its way to our MRF. What happens to the general waste once it's collected from your site? So the byproducts, the general waste is collected from site, and this is actually sent down the River Thames on barges to our partners called quarries. And what they have is an energy from waste facility. So in other words, they incinerate the waste at very, very high temperatures. It creates gases, it creates steam, and these turn turbines. These turbines then create electricity, which gets sent back to the national grid. So if you are within that catchment area, you might be using electricity from general waste, which is a great thing. And the other byproduct from that is ash. So quarries, our partners, they use this ash as a road aggregate. So if there's any potholes nearby, they use all the ash and they pave over the potholes. So they have the smoothest roads outside their facility. They say they're doing it within London as well, but I don't really agree with them. If you come where I live, there is potholes everywhere. I feel like my car is going crazy every time I drive it. I have to drive very slowly on these roads. But yeah, let's talk about composite materials as well. So other things that are often being mistaken. So things like greasy pizza boxes, we get lots of questions about. Can they be recycled? Can they not be recycled? What about the oil? It is a bit of a tough one, and you're going to have to use your judgment for this. If something is very, very greasy and you can see loads and loads of oil at the bottom of the pizza box, that half will definitely have to be general waste. So if that's the case, you can split the pizza box in the middle, the top and the bottom. The top can be recycled, the bottom half cannot be recycled. Alternatively, if you do get a pizza and the box is completely clear, completely empty, you're not seeing any oil, it's fine, it can be recycled. Moving on, tissues as well. So tissues can be a bit of a tough one. Some people think tissues are recyclable, some people think not. It does just come down to the length of the paper fibers in the tissues. Unfortunately, when you go to grab a tissue, it doesn't actually say the length of the paper fiber on it, which is a little bit annoying. So you can't really tell if it's going to go in the general waste or the dry mix recycling. 99.9% of tissues that you're going to be using are going to be general waste, even if they're clean as well. So let's just make sure that they're going into the general waste, unless you have a specialist service where they are collecting the tissues separately from everything else. That's probably the only way that I would say that tissue would be recycled at site. And then the last one as well, compostable biodegradable items. There's a little bit of confusion around those as well. You know, sometimes you go to get a coffee and they give you a nice coffee cup and it says biodegradable on the side. And you're thinking, okay, that can be recycled, or even that can go in the food waste. It's going to break down, go in the food waste. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It doesn't break down in the same way as the food. And because it's a composite material, can't go in the dry mix recycling as well. So by default, it would have to go into the general waste unless you have a separate waste stream for that. And how can we tell what materials are recyclable? So firstly, you can always visit the Bywaters website. We do have a recycling posters and resources section, and also a recyclopedia as well. So you can type in anything, you know, it could be tissues, could be wooden stirrers, could be coffee cups, wherever it might be, and it will tell you where it should go. Alternatively, you can contact your local council as well. So unfortunately, it's not all standardized just yet. So every council is a little bit different and they will all accept different items. So just making sure that you're aware of what your council is asking for is key. And then lastly, for general waste, just speaking about some of the legislations as well. So there are a few things for general waste to actually reduce the amount of general waste that we're producing. So Section 34 of the Environmental Protection Act of 1990, responsibility to ensure that all reasonable steps are taken to manage waste properly. So that applies to anyone who produces, imports, keeps, stores, transports, treats or disposes of waste. And there are a few landfill taxes and things like that that are to deter businesses from sending their waste to landfill. And recently, the rise of energy from waste facilities. So that is what we were talking about with quarries, our partners there. We send it off to an energy from waste facility. Moving on to food waste. Food waste is very, very important, as I mentioned before. And we've got a bit of a stat for you there. So UK biodegradable municipal waste, in other words, food waste, that's sent to landfill has increased to 6.8 million tonnes from, well, in 2021, from 6.1 million tonnes in 2020. So that basically goes to show that we're not actually collecting the food waste well enough. A lot of people are actually putting this into their general waste, or they're putting this into their dry mix recycling, and it's going to landfill and it's going to other places. But we want to be collecting it separately and making sure that we capture everything that we can use from the food waste. So why does it matter? You know, reduced emissions. So food waste contributes significantly to landfills. It produces a lot of methane, a lot of carbon dioxide, and this can actually be used in a better way if we're collecting it separately. It is cheaper to put it in the food waste and get it collected rather than throwing it away as general waste. General waste is more expensive. And there are a lot of circular solutions. So recycling food waste can create compost, fertilizer, biofuels, all things that can be used. I'm just going to quickly talk about common items that can go in the food waste. You think it's quite easy? Food can go in the food waste. Tea bags as well can also go in. It doesn't matter if it has a little string, that's fine, it can all go in. Coffee grounds also, and small fish and meat bones can also go in. The only time when bones are a bit of a problem is if you're trying to dispose of a whole carcass, then it gets to be a bit of a problem. I don't think anyone will be bringing that into the office or anything like that. If you do, then tell them it goes into the general waste. And then some common contaminants that we might be finding in here, things like tissues or food packaging. So a lot of the time people, they eat their food, there's still a little bit of food left in their tray or their takeaway, and they just throw the entire thing in there. Unfortunately, that is not good. That is a very, very bad contaminant in this waste stream, and it would need to be taken out because that can't break down. And that's the same thing for compostable or biodegradable packaging that we spoke about earlier. It doesn't break down in the same way, and a lot of people throw them in here thinking that it can. And then again, things like wooden stirrers or wooden cutlery, people think that because it's wood, it can break down. It doesn't break down in the right way. So unfortunately, it can't go in the food waste. It needs to be collected separately. And to show you what we're talking about, this is the waste journey for food. So when we collect your food, it will end up at an anaerobic digester, which is like a big tank. Almost think of it like your stomach. It has got the correct temperature of about 37 degrees, it's got the correct humidity levels, it's got 0 oxygen and lots of microorganisms in there. And within about 72 hours, all of those microorganisms break down everything and creates 2 byproducts. So number 1 is biogas. So if you are within the catchment area again, and you are using, let's say, gas hobs, you might be using biogas, which is great news. And the other one is a digestate, or a very, very high quality fertilizer. So let's say all your food waste that you've taken from your building, it's all going into the anaerobic digester, it's coming out as your food waste. This food waste gets sent off to nearby farms when they can actually grow more food, which you can buy. So it's a circular economy product, circular, as you can see, everyone's going round and round. But if we just take it back for a second and think about some of the common contaminants that are going in, what would happen if, let's say, a plant lined plastic item made its way into here? I mean, obviously it's a contaminant and they've tried to take it out before, but what would happen if it did end up in there? Unfortunately, it wouldn't break down within the first 10 goes. It wouldn't break down within 20, 30, probably take about 40 or 50 goes to actually break down. It doesn't have any calorific value, so it won't produce any usable biogas. And as a digestate, it's not really going to help at all as well. It's not going to be having any nutrients that's going to be helping crops to grow. And if anything, it's probably going to be making it worse. You know, small bits of microplastic could be slipping through and actually going into the fertilizer, which means, you know, if it's being sent off to grow carrots, for example, you might be ending up with little microplastics in your carrots. So things like that is something that we really want to avoid. And unfortunately, it is a big issue when these companies sort of label things as biodegradable. They don't really share all the details, shall we say, and it's sort of left up to the consumer, which is not the way that we sort of think that it should be dealt with. Moving on, a few tips for the food waste stuff. Again, I know we've spoken about it so often today, but don't add compostable packaging to the food waste. Make sure that we're separating our food and avoiding the packaging. So again, food goes in, the packaging goes out into the general waste, or if it's plastic, give it a rinse and maybe put it into the dry mix recycling. Buying local seasonal produce to avoid supply chains with increased emissions, so buy local. And contact local councils and groups and charities, see if there are local food initiatives. So we work with a charity called Feast With Us, and we host sessions throughout the year, which are free to join. So if you do want to join, just drop us a line, drop us an email, and we can sort of arrange something like that. But it's sessions where we would go off to a kitchen, basically, and use food that otherwise would have been thrown away to create meals for those who are in need. And then using reuse apps as well is a great way to reduce food waste. So things like Too Good To Go, if you haven't heard of it, it's an app that companies will promote if they do have leftover things that they would otherwise be throwing away, and they really put the prices really low. So you know, it could be from the supermarket, it could be from a restaurant, and they will just be giving you huge amounts of food for next to nothing. So it's really good and worthwhile if you haven't heard of that before. Moving on to some legislation for the food waste as well. So businesses will need to ensure separate collection streams. And this is for any business that produces over 5 kg of food waste weekly. They will need to have a food waste bin. This legislation is going live, or has gone live already. It definitely has gone live in Scotland and Northern Ireland. The UK one has been pushed back. Again, I'm not too sure why, but that will be coming into place at some point. So making sure that if you are producing 5 kg plus of food waste weekly, you do have a separate collection for that. And businesses need to adapt these changes, not only for compliance, but reducing environmental impact. And again, collecting food waste is cheaper than if you're collecting the same weight in general waste. So it reduces costs as well. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about batteries and hazardous waste. This is very important. So over 20,000 tons of batteries are sent to landfill every year in the UK, which is a lot, and it takes 50 times more energy to make a battery than it gives during its life. So it's very important that we're actually recapturing these materials and using as much as we can from them. We produce 400 million tons of hazardous waste each year, which is almost 13 tons a second. Huge amounts. And moreover, you know, if the environment or the public is left unsafely exposed to these materials, it might have severe health implications as well. So making sure that we're collecting this hazardous waste correctly. You know, if we have anything that can break down, or things like paint as well. A lot of times paint, people forget about paint, but if you are using it, it's classed as hazardous. It needs to be collected as that as well. You know, a lot of the fumes, a lot of the things like that can actually get into, you know, if you're washing it out, it can get into the environment and be quite hazardous. So make sure that you have proper disposal, you have separate storage for anything that might be hazardous, and make sure that everything is labeled and packaged correctly as well. These three things make a huge impact. So just make sure if you do have any things like that on site, it is being properly disposed of, you have separate storage for it, and the labeling and packaging is correct as well. And next, I'm going to hand over to Dave. He is a principal sustainability consultant at Auditel, and I will hand over to him now. Dave.
Thanks, Emmanuel. So hello, everyone. Probably helpful for me to do a bit of an introduction before we dive in. So I'm Dave, I'm with Auditel, and in general terms, my day job is supporting businesses on sustainability and sort of leadership team focus to understand how they can make sustainability in sort of inverted commas work really hard for the business, rather than the business having to work really hard to be sustainable. So I'm going to try and make this somewhat interactive. So if you'll oblige me. So when I talk about waste, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And if it is sort of recycling, if you could react, give me a thumbs up, nod your head, whatever it might be. Right, cool. So we've got a couple of nodding heads. So what this basically means is that for sustainability, and this isn't just waste, this is a whole host of other things, but it means that the de facto approach for businesses is often to think about things from an internal perspective. So how can we change what we are doing as individuals rather than change actually what the business is or how the business is operating, and looking externally at partners. So what I'm going to be talking about in the next few slides is waste in the context of supply chain and supply chain management. So as I've just alluded to, that sort of the internal perspective is obviously or can obviously be one of the biggest gotcha moments. So this is where businesses are looking at things and going, well, is this really doing much for us? It's excessively costly, becoming disillusioned, and those things tend to be, once a company has thought about things like purchasing an electric vehicle, they've looked at the economics of something like a heat pump. They've gone to market to try to source more sustainable materials, or they're investing in something like an accreditation or a carbon accounting piece of software. The bottom line that is in sort of the vast majority of those cases, without wanting to give you a sort of fixed percentage, they tend to come at a net cost. So that's both in terms of the financial outlay, but also the internal capacity requirement, and the knock-on consideration, if you like, is the reward. So what I want to talk about today is highlight where those elusive sort of win-wins and the virtuous circle is, and how some really simple changes can be made in the business to deliver some really sustainable and scalable impacts that are not just focused on environmental impact, but commercial impact. So what we're talking about here, and Jill is a consumer on the left, and you'll have to forgive me for the obviousness of the names, and Jack is a business. So again, from an interactive perspective, how many of you have had your car renewal, your home insurance renewal through in the post and just took what your existing supplier said was going to be the new cost? Hopefully there aren't going to be a load of nods, because I've been, sort of forwarded you on to Martin Lewis. But you'd be surprised at the number of businesses who don't actively manage their supply chain, their suppliers, the contracts that they have in the business. And what that consequently leads to is excessive costs and lower level service and lower level sort of impact. So you can go to the next slide, please, Emmanuel. Yeah. So what this means is that, and through no fault of their own, businesses tend to spend the majority of time managing the big costs. So we'll define that as strategic spend. And what we're talking about here is sort of like the 80-20 rule. So big costs, big impact, and then as a consequence, the long tail often becomes, limited focus. And limited focus, I'm talking about either not being reviewed in the course of a year, or does get reviewed in the course of a year, but nothing necessarily changes. What's really important here is that when you look at the strategic spend, if you then take the tail spend and sum that together, very often it accounts for a larger proportion as a total percentage, even though you might only have 1 to 3 things which account for a very big percentage in and of themselves. So strategic spend is often things like staffing costs, material rates, shipping costs, fuel. On the flip side, you then have the tail spend of things like waste management, energy costs, heating, PPE, uniform costs, mobile phones, IT spend. The list goes on. Next slide, please, Emmanuel. And what this looks like, and I'm just taking waste management as an example here, and it's not to do Bywaters a disservice. This is applicable for any number of other supplier arrangements or agreements that you have. But the vast majority, once you've got past the initial contract piece of the puzzle, is it becomes a rolling 12-month agreement. And the vast majority of those 12-month agreements have something called an API, an annual price increase, which obviously rolls. And that's not as a forcing function of a better service. They're baking that in obviously to make sure that their margins are sort of not hampered. So if we're just looking at waste, the things you are going to be paying for are the waste that you're creating and the weight that it holds, the number of bins you have, the services you require and the number of those, and the frequency of collections. And then obviously there are some sort of penalties around excess weight, contamination, that can add to that cost. Next slide, please, Emmanuel. Without managing those relationships effectively, and I don't want to give people sort of a lesson in secondary school maths again, but the impact of compound growth means that within 5 years, if you have a growth or an API in your contract, you could be paying for exactly the same service. Your business might not have grown, the service might not have improved, and your cost will have doubled. Next slide, please, Emmanuel. So the question here is, if you're looking at suppliers, what are the questions that you really want to be asking yourselves? So the 4 that I would say you want to be considering are, when did I hear from them last? When did I last get a report that talked about how well they were doing in terms of the service delivery? So in a waste context, this could be recycling rates, and recycling rates can be a forcing function of both behaviours, but also the actual performance of how things are getting handled. Are they just increasing my costs, or are they actually working with me to be more effective and understand if there are more efficient ways to be sort of operating as a business? And are they providing me insights that could lead to a better partnership? So in practical terms, a waste provider can do something like a waste audit. And if you don't have a provider who's doing this, you want to ask the question. So there's a client that I've worked with who did a waste audit. They're a legal business. End of a Friday afternoon, came in essence, we got the boardroom with a big table, and we tipped the bins upside down and went through what the makeup of that waste was. What we found that 70% of the waste that was created on that Friday was paper towels from the toilet, which was both massive in terms of volume and was a really simple change to just moving to a hand dryer. For another business, they found out that I think it was in the region of about 50% of their waste was Costa cups because they didn't have an internal coffee machine. So doing something like a waste audit and working with suppliers who actively engage you to deliver business efficiency and business sort of improvements can be a massive boon. Next slide, please, Manuel. So why am I talking about money? So the point here is that, in short, if you can find and manage your suppliers better, you unlock 3 things by proxy. Supply discussions very often uncover efficiency opportunities. They very often uncover cost savings. And by proxy, if you're able to use less, spend less, you're also delivering sustainability gains and limiting your emissions. And this is really where so many businesses sort of fail to see or fail to find that holy grail of sustainability, which is unlocking costs, delivering efficiency and emissions opportunities. And most importantly, when it comes to sort of really getting stuff done, that's the focus that business leaders want to hear and know about. If they can deliver a sustainable outcome or an emissions outcome by proxy of a better output, or by proxy of delivering an improved business outcome, that's a win-win. It's a much more difficult thing to sell when there's a net cost without a business outcome. Next slide, please, Emmanuel. So if I'm going to throw some things at you that would be really good that you can spend half an hour looking at where there's very likely to be opportunity. Those include utilities, obviously, so electricity, gas, water, and then 5 supply chain topics, if you like, around waste, packaging, laundry, which is huge within sort of the restaurant, hospitality, hotel space, consumables, as I alluded to, around paper towels, and things like fuel. And then what I just wanted to address as the last slide is that this isn't just, you know, like a nice to have. The scale of opportunity here is, I don't know, you could describe it as palpable, tangible. Very, very often you will likely see within the context of one of those topics emissions reductions of 30, 40, 50% and cost reductions that you know sort of tie alongside that. So whether it's using less fuel through better delivery routes, having a centralized procurement system that means in the top left your employees are not using Amazon and actually they are, you know, sort of only purchasing what the business is approving, and that those products that they're purchasing are approved for the right reasons. Looking at green energy tariffs and working to not only understand if you can buy your energy better, but if you can use it better. Your equipment might not have been, you know, sort of renewed or had an audit in the last 2-3 years, and it might be underperforming. And those are the areas where, with really low amounts of investment, both in terms of time and money, you can deliver all of the things I've just talked about in terms of return on investment and emissions and impact savings. And that's it. So any questions or anything that I can help answer?
Thank you so much, Dave. That was great. Guys, if you do have any questions, please don't feel too shy. You can unmute yourself and sort of ask directly, or if you do want to ask via the chat as well, that's fine. Just let us know your thoughts, any questions you might have for either for me or for Dave.
Hi, Emmanuel. Just a quick one. Are you able to